Welcome back to the Melius Performance Podcast. This is a bit of a special episode. I released another episode this week. So we had Shane Finn, the ultra endurance athlete, out yesterday. And seeing as it's a long weekend, we thought to give you a bonus episode this weekend with my good friend Jason Van Schie from Flourish and also the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. Jason has launched a new podcast. You can check him out on LinkedIn or over at his website. The Psych Health and Safety Podcast, a very relevant and pertinent topic at the moment, given the COVID-19 pandemic, changes in the workplace, and a lot of discussion around mental health in the community. I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm just going to get into this episode with Jason Van Schie. Hope you enjoy. Welcome back to Melius Performance Podcast. I got dressed up today to talk to my old friend, Jason Van Schie. Jason, how you doing?
Yeah, really good, man. Great to see you.
Yeah, I put on a t-shirt today especially for you. So normally we don't record visual or, the video on when we're doing these podcasts, but I thought I'd get dressed up today and put on a t-shirt. The first question I have for you, Jason, is do you like my hair at the moment?
Is it different?
Yeah, I've actually not got a cut in about 9 weeks. It's the longest I've ever gone without a haircut since I was born.
Yeah, you're looking like a hippie, mate.
I do look like a hippie, yeah.
But it's good to see you, mate, and good to hear your mellifluous tones. Great.
My what tones?
Mellifluous.
Can you explain that word, please, for the viewers and for me?
Deep, melodious. I love your accent. It is fantastic.
Like someone said to me, dulcet tones recently. Would that be similar?
Yeah, similar.
Yeah, my wife said I sound like a creep on the podcast, but there you go. And I said, how do you know you don't even listen? She goes, I'm sick of listening to you anyway at home, so why would I go and listen to a podcast? She listened to one podcast and she cringed listening to my voice on it. So that was...
Yeah, I would never put my wife through that.
So Jason, you join us today from the far reaches of Perth on the other side of the river. For the people who don't know you, Jason, can you give people a little bit of your background and sort of where you grew up and your educational background as a way of context into our discussion today?
Yeah, okay, jeepers, where I grew up. So I kind of grew up in Western Sydney, the Bronx of Sydney, if you like. Fortunately, made my way over to Perth about 20 years ago. Met a lovely woman who's now my wife. We have 3 kids. So personally, yeah, life's pretty hectic with sport and whatnot. Over the weekends, as I know you're really into your own personal fitness and training. I do definitely come to work on Monday for a bit of a break after trying to fit in 6 or 7 sporting events over the weekend. But I guess professionally, I've got a background in occupational psychology, been working in the field for about 15 years. Like yourself, I've got a real interest in sleep health and fatigue risk management, and that's kind of where I cut my teeth on, I guess, health and safety and the risk management kind of perspective. But about 7 or 8 years ago now, I kind of struck out on my own, set up People Diagnostic, and 3 years ago, kind of thought, how do we do this at more scale and put some technology behind it? So in 2018, we became a technology business officially, hiring our first developers, and now we've got a thriving team and got a couple of products in market where we're trying to do preventative mental health really well and a bit differently to what other people are doing.
Excellent. So Jason, I actually heard this on another podcast during the week. Somebody was talking about industrial psychology. I actually think it was on a mixed martial arts podcast. Somebody goes, "Oh, that fighter, I think she was a lady, was studying PhD or master's in industrial psychology," and there was a bit of a back and forth about what's industrial psychology, what's occupational psychology. So, what exactly is it? What makes that subject different than normal psychology, and who you go and you have a conversation with in an office?
Yeah, you should actually listen to episode 7 of our podcast. Ian. We actually had. I don't listen to
the garbage like that.
Why would you?
I'm asking the question. I'm asking the questions here. You're answering them. Come on.
I'm trying to remember. We had Heather Eichen, who's actually the chair of the College of Organisational Psychologists. So that's our peak body, if you like.
Yeah.
And she was explaining, what is an organisational psychologist. But you'll find industrial psychology, organisational psychology, occupational psychology, all very similar, if you like. In Australia, there is a protected title of organisational psychology or psychologist. And it's really about dealing with people in workplaces primarily. And it's about mainly optimizing outcomes. So it's not necessarily like clinical psychology where you're dealing with people who are ill or not doing well and trying to get them back to a level of normalcy. I really am drawn to organizational psychology, first of all, because I was interested in sports psychology and optimal performance and working with elite athletes, but there's not a lot of jobs in there and not a lot of money in there. Can't really,
that's for sure,
build a family, look after a family, being a sports psychologist too easily anyway, unless you're one of the elite. So organizational psychology was the next best thing for me. I still get to work with teams. I'm not working on the illness side. I get to help groups of people to optimize performance. And at the moment, I'm really enjoying this psychological health and safety space.
So as the name suggests then, Jason, it's more about the organizational design. It's more about the systems you can put in place within a business, how you can affect change by, the resources, the team structure, the team dynamics, potentially the roster design, the individual fitness. It's all these different factors that would feed into it, as opposed to exactly what you said is you don't line up 100 people and go, right, I'm going to see, employees 1 to 100 over the next 2 weeks and work with them individually. It's more like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's more dealing with groups rather than individual level interventions, although there is some of that. But again, it would be more around the positive rather than the negative. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So you said in the last few years, you've been going on this route around sort of workplace mental health. And again, I suppose just work for people listening. We hear all these terms at the moment: mental health, mental wellness, mental illness, psychological health, psychological stress. And you kind of think like, wait, now, which is it? Is it this or is it this? Then people are talking about mindfulness. All these terms get kind of used interchangeably. And I think your answer is going to be, go back and listen to episodes 3, 4, and 5. But for the people who don't want to listen to your podcast or just want the quick high level,
Look,
what's the difference between all of those?
Yeah, I guess one of my pet peeves is when people say mental health illness. That's a new one I've heard recently. Look, mental health is basically a state where people are in positive mental well-being, right? They're able to contribute to the community. They're able to, work productively, that sort of thing. That's similar to, I guess, what the World Health Organization would define mental health as. But you're right, many people treat mental health as a synonym for mental illness. But mental illness is its own thing, right? This is when people are not well. It's when they're ill. And I find it really interesting because when you use the term physical health, people don't think about diabetes and cardiovascular disease straight away.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
When you talk about mental health, people think about, depression, anxiety, stress. They're not thinking about what does good mental health look like. So then, you're right. Then people use all different convoluted terms. Again, one of my pet peeves at the moment is psychological safety versus psychological health and safety. You can understand why people get a little confused. So psychological safety is when people feel like they have voice and able to, say what they want at work without fear of repercussion. Whereas psychological health and safety is more about applying risk management principles to the identification and mitigation of psychosocial hazards. So they're actually two very different constructs. Both confusingly have benefits for mental health if you do them well. But they are actually completely different things and so often get used interchangeably as well. So I don't think we're going to solve the problem of language today, mate. I know you're still getting that handle on English yourself. So I'm not going to try and give you any lessons on this because it's really hard. And I think what we need to do is just try and, as psychologists at least, use the correct terms and not convolute it any further than what it currently is.
Yeah, sure. I did hear that little dig you had at me there in the middle there as well, but
yeah, I'm probably a bit too familiar with you, Ian. So sorry about that.
That's all right. I'm going to do a podcast in Spanish this year, and we'll see then who can speak Spanish or English. Okay, so Jason, a lot of people maybe sitting back and thinking about in their workplace, they see elements of this occurring, or they see nothing occurring. They don't see a systematic approach to this, and they're maybe asking questions like, we don't even screen people coming to a business for mental illness, never mind even talking about mental health. What's your thoughts on, or what have you seen around an industry, around the people in businesses with mental illnesses that have either, had them coming into the business or have developed them over time? A bit like what we see with sleep disorders, for example, or physical health issues, like you said. They might come in fit and healthy, doing lots of shift work, gain weight, become diabetic. What sort of percentage do we see? Because obviously there's general stats and for the general population, but what do you see in business these days with people coming in? And on that, are businesses equipped to manage that?
Yeah, and I guess this is where we have to really talk about, what is the role of the employer and what are their obligations. And if someone has a physical injury and it's occurred outside of work, it's actually not the employer's responsibility to take care of that person. But a reasonable employer would go, well, look, we want you to be at work. We want to help you to remain productive, right? So we'll get you a wheelchair, or we'll give you light duties so you can still contribute to the team and be productive. And when people come into work with mental illness, again, it's not the role of the employer to cure that mental illness for that person, but they have to make sure that they are creating a work environment that's not going to exacerbate that mental illness. And this is where they need to think about the root causes of work-related stress. So things like workload or lack of autonomy or poor support from colleagues or supervisors. So that's actually the role of the employer, to create a healthy and safe work environment so that when people come to work, they can leave it in at least as good a condition as when they arrived, if not a better condition when they arrived. So it's really the same goals as physical health and safety, right? That's what we're trying to do. And that's what we need to understand that employers' roles are. So when we talk about things like the provision of EAP, counselling services for employees, that's actually not an employer obligation. Now, it is becoming something that is kind of expected, right? That employers will do that, and it's good social responsibility, if you like. But it's not a obligation, definitely not a legal obligation for companies to provide that. But funnily enough, they seem to be failing in many instances in their legal obligations of identifying and mitigating stress or sources of stress that make people ill.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's more of a kind of a goodwill effort, or a way of looking after employees long term, keeping them engaged with the business, ensuring that they can contribute, and recognizing the fact that things happen in life, stress occurs, or mental illness or periods of poor mental health occur. Everybody goes, people go through it.
Yeah, people can get injured like you did, mate, with your neck. I've had a spinal fusion myself, L5S1. And, a generous employer or an empathetic employer would go, well, look, Ian's, injured himself, trying to keep himself fit and healthy in his time off, hurt himself, that's unlucky. We're not going to penalise him for that. We're going to work with him to see how we can still be a contributor to the team, rather than saying, oh, no, Ian's no good anymore. We're going to toss him to the side. It's really about understanding that. And I think employers sometimes get confused, and maybe that's why they are a little bit apprehensive about dealing with mental health in the workplace, because they're like, well, that's really an employee thing. That's not our thing. And in many instances, it's actually not the employer's responsibility, but they do still need to think about the work environment and the contribution of that to people's well-being over time.
Do you think, Jason, that leaders are, afraid of this, that they're afraid of tackling it in any shape, way or form, to kind of go, look, mental health, mental illness, I don't know whether someone's schizophrenic, bipolar, it's not up to me to decide, it's not up to our leaders to decide. And, if someone's got a problem and they come to us, we're going to say, go to your GP or go to a psychologist. We're not a mental health facility. And this is what I've heard from some leaders. And I'm just wondering, does it come from a place of fear and lack of understanding or ignorance for, not sounding too crass, but like, is it more about that? Whereas maybe if we took those people and educated them about what is mental health, what is mental illness, what is psychological stress, and we start showing them all these things and went, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, this is what you have to do legally, these are the nice things to do, this is how you should show empathy in these situations, these are where you can direct people to their services, and you just kind of stop and orientate people to what's really happening. Is that something you do yourself? Is it something that businesses do? Is it something that we can do to kind of remove the fear from situations?
Oh, 100%. It comes down to competence, right? Yeah. And if we're not training leaders to have that competence, we can't expect them just to pick it up because they've listened to my podcast, for example. So it is all about competence. And in fact, in the incoming ISO 45003 standard on psychological health and safety at work, there is a big focus on building up competence for senior management, line management, so that they understand what are their obligations and what is within their control at those different levels in order to support the mental health and well-being of employees.
Just taking a slightly different tact here for a minute is because this is a question I have, and I've actually wanted to ask you a while ago. I've asked a few other people. In the last probably couple of years, with the exception of COVID, and we'll put that to the side because that's a subject I want to come to in a few minutes, we've seen a lot of discussion in workplaces, and I've seen that in many different industries now, and even with sports teams, the whole kind of mindfulness thing, right? And so what I've seen happening is, I've spoken about meditation in this podcast and mindfulness and things like that as well. But now what I've seen happen recently, particularly over the last year or so, is that mindfulness now has become a tool to slap people over the head with. Let's say, for example, Jason, you work for me and we run a small garage and you're doing car services and you forget to, change out the oil on Mr. Jones's car. And then, I turn around and go to you, Jason, you should be more mindful. You need to practice mindfulness. And that's why you're not putting the oil in the car, right? So that's a very stupid example, but that's kind of what I'm seeing across the board. People are using mindfulness, and I've seen adults use it with kids in the supermarket. It's become this kind of catch cry, this solution for everything, And so you're supposed to be walking around all day in this kind of Zen pose, never too happy, never too sad, never too mad, never too bad. And you're constantly in this hum in the middle and you're doing everything perfect. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, it gives me the shits, I'll be honest, right? Because I think what's happening is we're not allowing people to be emotional at certain times. People feel happy, people feel sad, people make mistakes. It's not intentional. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So, but this mindfulness thing has come in as like, I even heard one person say, we don't really have a mental health strategy. We promote mindfulness. And I think that's really dangerous.
That's a cop out.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this coming in. And I maybe, is it just what I've seen, or do you see it as well, or what's happening here, do you think?
Yeah, look, mindfulness obviously has a good evidence base and has been proven to be effective in...
Well, and I'm not disputing that, by the way.
Yeah. So, but this is the thing, right? Because it's got a good evidence base, people go, okay, mindfulness, that's it. So what we're going to do is we're going to use mindfulness for everything. We're going to get mindfulness for peak performance. We're going to use mindfulness for sleep. We're going to use mindfulness for focus, well, for relaxation, to manage stress. It's now like a tonic for everything, right? So I see, mindfulness for those who practice it can be really effective if we're talking about, protecting your mental health and well-being is a really good way of reducing the stress response. So, when we have the sympathetic nervous system kick in and we got all the, adrenaline and cortisol and, heart racing and all the rest, sometimes it's good to kind of short circuit that. And mindfulness can kind of take your racing mind and everything and your breathing, and it can calm you down and, allow your relaxation or parasympathetic nervous system to kind of kick in, right? So, yeah, look, I think there is effects that you can use mindfulness for in terms of countering, stress and kind of bringing your attention or focus back to the present moment. Using it all day, every day, I don't think is that effective. I don't know too many people who do that. What I really hate, because we're talking about this today, it sounds like, is like you say, when workplaces go, oh, we've done mental health. We've had someone come in and teach mindfulness to everyone last week, right? So we're done. Or they say, we've done our EAP. We've done, we had these awesome cupcakes in September for Are You OK Day. And one of our leaders got up and talked about how he had a stint of depression for a few months. So we've done it. Like, how much more could we do? And I think it comes from a area of ignorance more than anything else. I think, there are a lot of people who want to do the right thing. They do, legitimately care about the well-being of employees, but they just don't know any better. And they go, well, these are the popular approaches. So if we do all the popular approaches, then we're kind of like doing this really, really well. Unfortunately, again, they're not really thinking about the root cause of potential problems or work-related stress or whatever. And so it doesn't matter how mindful you are, mate. If you're in a horrible working environment, it's not going to help. And I couldn't think of much worse than you being my boss in a mechanic shop, Ian. But I don't think I could do enough mindfulness too.
Well, I think, Jason, I think you're just not mindful enough maybe to work for me. So maybe that's the problem.
Look, I think there's a lot of, it's not a fad, right? Because there's a good evidence base, but I think employers, and we very much subscribe to the idea of the shared responsibility, like with fatigue risk management, there's shared responsibility. Yeah. We have to design good rosters that allow people appropriate times for rest and all the rest. But the individual still needs to take responsibility for their own sleep habits. Same thing with mental health. We need to allow people or give them resources to care for their own mental health preventatively. But what I don't see employers doing so much, is not like, I know you do roster reviews and stuff. I don't see as many organizations actually doing psychosocial risk assessments to look at what are the things that are causing people to be stressed that we actually have control over and would actually make people a lot better off.
This is a very interesting point, Jason. I think for anybody out there in business, in a leadership role, I think the first place you have to start is around the organizational design. I think too often in the sphere of health and safety, and even actually across business improvement, engineering, finance, and these are other areas I've worked upon and in conjunction with, there's a tendency to go straight to the individual or straight to the end of the process and blame that.
It's easy, mate. It's easy.
It's easy, right? And so the classic thing we get out of root cause analysis is more training and change the procedure, or operator didn't follow the procedure. And it's a classic rhetoric over and over again. And so I think it's, I'm going to be talking to somebody on this about incident investigations actually in the coming weeks. But I think it's really important that you take a step back and kind of whatever you design as a business is what you get. I call this business karma. So if you design a really crappy roster that doesn't allow adequate recovery, there's no point in sending in people to bang on people's heads about getting appropriate sleep. Or if you put on cupcakes and someone gets up and talks about mental health once a year, and you have a mindfulness app that you give people, there's no point in getting up there and going, why did Johnny down in the pit get really pissed off last night and walk off the job, and now he's saying he's not coming back to work here? Well, he should have just had his cupcake and used the app. So you know what I mean? And I think that's the danger, is that we don't step back and look at it in the bigger picture. And you're dead right, Jason. It's easy to go down to the end of the process, the symptom, as opposed to treating the root cause and looking at the organizational design, because what you get is what you design. And that's why I think, I always advocate this with organizations. I had a client this morning I'm working with, and I just said to them, you need to go back and look at your kind of principles of this roster design and what you're trying to achieve. Because if you put this roster in place, you're just going to have fatigued individuals constantly, and you're going to end up getting some incidents out of this. And I think it's a very similar type of field that we're talking about here.
Yeah, so you can understand how I'm using some of those fatigue risk management principles that I've been working on for a long time and trying to bring this to, I think I've got a bit of a head start on many in terms of psychological health and safety because of my roots in fatigue risk management. And obviously things like working hours and code of practices around that have been around for a lot longer than what we're seeing, codes of practice and standards for psychological health and safety at work. So, but there's so many overlaps between the two different disciplines.
Yeah. Jason, one of the things that comes up as well is that some people have, this has been said to me sort of anecdotally from employees on the shop floor, is that some people use mental health or mental illness to their advantage because they see an opportunity to kind of wedge it in here and never get fired. So in a day, we've seen lots of change over the last year or so with COVID, lots of redundancies, there's lots of cost cutting. We see this in some of the big mining companies, constant turnover of people. So some people have kind of gone, I have depression and I'm bipolar. And people have said, I'm not really sure if that person really has that. And they've just said it, and then they've kind of kept their job. Now, I've heard that in a few different situations, and I'm interested again to see what you think about people maybe potentially doing this as a method to kind of stay on the good side of an organization.
Yeah, I think it comes down to getting a good assessment done. And it, again, very good parallels with fatigue risk management. I mean, if someone had a sleep disorder, like insomnia or maybe they couldn't sleep during the day and they're on night shift and they said, I can't do night shift anymore because I can't sleep during the day. Well, then you need to get that person assessed, right? Like, do they actually have an underlying sleep disorder that we're, not aware of? Or, in the case of mental health, do they have a disorder? And so you actually need a trained professional. But I think sometimes leaders are concerned. They're like, oh, this person's got depression. I just need to accept that. I need to coddle that person basically, because I don't want to mention, I don't even want to say the word depression because it might make them suicidal. And again, that just comes from a lack of competence and, comfortableness talking about the subject matter. But again, it comes down to, leaders not needing to be psychologists or sleep experts. They can refer to those people, use your injury management processes, right? Is this person, assess the person and then look at what is reasonably able to be done in terms of accommodations for that person. But look, I've heard some people say, particularly on LinkedIn, going, oh, look, people can make claims for mental disorders or psychological injuries due to what's happened at work. But, really they'll just, it wasn't work, it was home, or, it wasn't really stress related. They're just playing up the symptoms so they could get compensation paid out or whatever. It's actually really, really hard for a medical professional to sign you off for a mental disorder to be able to get a workers' compensation claim. So I think if there's a few people who slip through the cracks and are able to fool the mental health professional, good on them, because there's so many people who deserve compensation, I think, for mental disorders that has happened at work that have been pushed down to TPD insurance because it's too hard to get it done at work. So, I think there's much more people that actually deserve compensation for psychological injuries than are people who are getting compensated for that. So, look, I think at the end of the day, what you have to do is to lean on your health professionals and then come up with a plan, like with those health professionals. Don't think you're the expert or have to be the expert as a line manager. Use your injury management teams to manage that situation.
Yeah, and again, Jason, this comes back to organizational design. If you don't have a process in place for, assessing people, if someone comes to you with a claim that they have depression and bipolar, for example, then if they haven't gone and had that assessment and provide that information to you as an employer, do you have a mechanism in place from an organizational system, which is maybe, I think it's a great example, is to try to use existing processes, injury management, return to work, whatever you want to call them. You don't have to develop a whole new stream. You can actually align or incorporate these things into existing systems and make it nice and easy for your business. You don't have to spend lots of money. Sometimes it's just about aligning some of your processes. And in actual fact, I think some business could actually save money by aligning some of their processes and doing this.
There's some additional consulting, mate. You can be a psych health and safety consultant as well now.
I don't know if I can pass. I had a psychologist tell me on LinkedIn I couldn't be a psychologist because I can't keep my mouth shut. That was a bit of, that was a bit of banter between myself and Michael Gradazar, who was on the podcast before. I know Michael Gradazar.
You're the only doctor on this podcast, by the way. So
that's true. If I say, if I can get a doctorate, anybody can. So that doesn't mean anything. It's like a forklift ticket. That's with all due respect to people with forklift tickets. I think I'd fail that one quicker. You put me off there. Okay, so that was what I was leading into. What about companies who are trying to weigh up the benefits of, implementing maybe psychological health and safety system into their business, or whatever wording they want to use, and they're sitting back and they're kind of looking at it and going, is this really worth it? Is it not? I know it's good for people, but at the end of the day, we're a business. The crux of it comes down to finance. What's the business case about putting this in? What's the ROI, return on investment for us? And so that kind of leads into a question, which is there any benefit to putting this in terms of a reduction in insurance premiums? Is there any tangible ways we can lower costs for organizations by putting these systems into place?
There's a ton, really. First of all, if we hit on the ROI, and I actually hate this study by PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2014, where they looked at the return on investment for mental health interventions. You
hate this study?
I hate it.
Okay.
But everyone uses it as a reference point. Okay. So basically they found on average, employers can get $2.30 back for every dollar they spend on mental health interventions. And they looked at things like resilience training and EAP and all this reactive stuff, right? Not even the proactive stuff. The reason I hate it is if you read past the abstract and you look at their methodology, you'll see to determine how much productivity they would lose from an employee if they had depression. A group of experts sat around the table, put their finger up in the air, and said 50%. So it didn't go beyond that. People with no vested interest in the outcome of this report decided that people were going to be 50% less productive if they had a mental disorder. So
they didn't even lick their finger before they put it in the air. They just put
sorry, I forgot that bit. Yes. So look, despite the flaws of the methodology, it is a common cited reference. Yes, for every dollar that you put in to even some, reactive type strategies for mental health, there seems to be some sort of return on investment. Over in Canada, they have what's called the National Standard of Canada for Psychological Health at Work. And they are probably the most advanced, I'd say, out of any country in the world around psychological health and safety. And have had really good adoption, and particularly in industries like healthcare and education and first responders and government and administration. But they have got some great evidence now, because it's been around for 8 years or so. And around when people take a systemic approach using more of a health and safety angle compared to a wellness individual angle, that, you can get better patient outcomes, less errors in the workplace, less time off work, more productivity out of people. So there's all these great benefits. Not to mention, yes, you can get lower insurance premiums. And what you're finding is that workers' comp insurers are really scared at the moment because of the escalating amount of psychological injuries that are being compensable. And the cost. So Safe Work New South Wales recently published some data along with their draft code of practice for psychological health at work. And they found that in the 4 years preceding 2019, there was a 3.5% increase in physical injury claims in the state over that period. So pretty stable. And I think you'd agree, like the health and safety industry has actually gotten pretty good at what they do. And now it's kind of like small adjustments that they're making in order to see benefits. They're not going to get massive step changes anymore. However, in the same period of time, they recorded a 53% increase in psychological injury claims. So massive increase.
Really?
Now, the problem is that the average claim for a psychological injury is $85,000 compared to about $20,000 for a physical injury claim. So not only are we seeing this rapid increase in injury claims, but they cost a lot as well. And then that ends up getting added, obviously, to an employer's policy costs over time. So I think employers need to be mindful, sorry about that, they need to be aware that these things can cost them over time through their premiums for workers' compensation, and the insurers are scared because they're the ones that end up footing the bill immediately when people are having these issues. I
think the good thing about what you're saying there, Jason, is that unlike in the sleep world, for example, and using the context of Australia, Deloitte Access Economics have published a number of different reports. Who's the enemy of PricewaterhouseCoopers? They've published.
I was on the board of the Sleep Health Foundation actually when we approved this study. By the way,
so I think that was the. So that's a great study, then, Jason. So
it was published, unlike the PwC one. I can tell you that. So,
and I think that was. I think the third iteration of that. But in general, that report has shown, that, basically sleep and sleep problems are getting worse in the country. That led to a parliamentary inquiry, which I give evidence on as well, here in Western Australia. So, but what I think we haven't done in the sleep world is we haven't articulated, or we haven't seen the impact like you've just articulated there, because what you've taken is more of what I would call a balanced scorecard approach, working left to right across the board in your mind's eye. You can see that there's definitely, benefit to health and safety of individuals. You spoke about people and leadership. You spoke about production-related stuff like errors. You also spoke about finance in terms of the workers' compensation claims. So very, very quickly, which comes back to one of my previous questions, which I asked you about, is very quickly an employer can sit down and actually put the numbers together and go, you know what? I've had X amount of claims this year. I've had X amount of issues. I really need to do something about here, because if I don't, I'm going to start losing money hand over fist here by not managing this, risk in my business. And like I said to organizations, we do stuff in the fatigue management space, human performance, medical design processes and so on, so that more occupational health and elements of safety. And I said to people like that, our leaders, especially the engineers and the financial types, if you never care about the people, care about the money, because you're losing money hand over fist and you've got multiple errors here and you've got no productivity happening. So leaving that aside, you need to do it for that reason. And so some people will be hooked by that. Other people will be hooked by the safety element and want to do the right thing, And so I think having that kind of smorgasbord of benefits for everybody is really key. So it's great to hear you say that. It's encouraging.
Yeah, the other thing I think is the reputational damage, right? We're seeing it now on the national stage with the rape that came to light recently. There's been cases with AMP Capital, for example, with sexual harassment that came out from one of their leaders in their organisation. Now, we had Dr. Rebecca Mahalik on episode 6 of our podcast, and she spoke to how she watched, once it came out in the public about the sexual harassment, that the perpetrator was one of their senior leaders in the organisation, that they watched the shareholder revolt, and they lost $2.3 billion off their market cap at that point in time because they didn't deal with it properly. And what they should have done is dealt with it systemically, understanding that sexual harassment, like bullying harassment, is a psychosocial hazard. And we can't just take an individual lens or a a IR lens to that, it really is a health and safety issue. Like, how did this happen in our organization that someone got sexually harassed or raped, right? What you can see is huge reputational damage as well if you don't manage these risks accordingly.
Yeah, and like to a lesser extent, completely different subject. We've seen that with Rio Tinto and the relationship with local Aboriginal people with the caves. We've seen what that's done. Like, we've seen a massive shake-up in that business. Yep. We've seen it affecting the share price, the whole lot. Where I think maybe potentially 20 years ago, we meant people that might have been kind of just, oh yeah, that happened, brushed aside, maybe a bit of an apology, an acknowledgement, cash payment, and moved on. Potentially, I don't know. It's just an example.
Now we've got a lot of work shareholders now, so we have to be mindful of that.
You can't say mindful, Jason.
Yes, all right. Got to get that on my vocabulary now, don't I?
No, you're going to say it the whole time. I think actually it's interesting you bring up about the sexual harassment and the rape case, because this is something that we're seeing more of happening. With businesses in the news. It's a hard subject to tackle, and it's a hard subject probably for organizations to discuss. I've heard some. My wife works in a mining company, and she's pretty like tough skinned. She listens to a lot of crap, and as people know, I'm ex-military and mining, and I don't hear a lot of crazy comments. Maybe just I'm not around it, but I've heard a lot of really crazy comments in the last maybe 6 to 12 months. Where I was completely oblivious to it. And then when my wife starts telling me stuff, or friends of hers, I'm like, people speak to you like that on a mine site? Never mind put their hands on them, or I'm like, that's like, I don't know I don't know what the word is for it, but to speak to people in a vulgar manner, like it's crazy. And I'm like 20 something years ago in the military, I didn't even hear guys speak like that. I can't believe it. So I think what the good thing about what I'm saying is that it's bringing to light some of the bad kind of, speech that's happening in organizations. Yep. And hopefully more people will stand up and go, hey, that's not appropriate to speak like that. Because I think once you allow that to happen, that leads into other things that then can occur, because you're building a culture of acceptance around that sort of speak. And, a couple of days ago here in Australia, we've seen, and I haven't been following this, I just read the headlines on it. We see someone in the Liberal Party has been raped in Canberra. So at the highest levels in government, this is occurring. And I think in some hand too, we're a bit afraid to talk about it and what's going on. So
Dr. Rebecca is fantastic in this area, and throwing or shining a light on this through a health and safety lens, if you like, versus an IR lens or a HR lens. And she's got some very good views on that. So if anyone's interested in finding out more, I'd definitely seek out Dr. Rebecca Mahalik, definitely expert in this area. Okay.
Is she based here in Australia, Jason?
She's Perth-based, mate. So we got some good people out of Perth, I can tell you that.
Might have to buy her a coffee and pick her brain on that subject, because it's an interesting one. And we're seeing lots more of, this subject and other subjects around like free speech, diversity, these type of things, making headway over the last couple of years in organizations. And, it's a tricky minefield. And I think we're in the danger of not being able to talk about it with cancel culture, when we just sometimes, I think, by not being able to talk about and openly ask questions, that's where we become ignorant of these subjects and we don't know what's happening. And that's
have her on your podcast, mate. I reckon your listeners would love to hear from her. She definitely doesn't hold back. So,
right. I'll make a note of that. I like someone who comes at me with fire. That's great. Jason, I want to kind of just diverge into the whole COVID situation, because there's probably not one person on the planet that hasn't been affected by this. I'd be very surprised if they haven't. So a couple of things that I've been looking at myself from a scientific perspective, without taking a viewpoint on governments and how governments manage it and so on, just looking at the data. What I've kind of got interested in is the preventative data, or the let's say the things that people can do, the preventable data, the preventable causes that people can affect. And two ones that come out, which I haven't seen much of on the other ones, but two ones that come out and has a fair bit of data around it is alcohol and obesity. And so we know that like alcohol, affects people in terms of sleep, psychological health as well. We know that obesity, definitely affects people in terms of other metabolic conditions, leads to sleep disorders. And I'm not too sure about actually the link with mental health or mental illness. But like, to give people an example, since the COVID-19 has happened, according to the World Health Organization and some other sources as well, 70% of Australians are drinking more than they usually did. 32%, 70%, 32% are concerned about the amount of alcohol they are drinking or someone like a loved one around them. People are drinking more alcohol than they planned or thought they had. Women are probably the biggest increase. Most women have increased their alcohol consumption by 41%. Alcohol, I don't even drink and I can't even say this word. Alcohol-related problems have increased by 39%. And in the UK, people who, before the COVID-19 pandemic, maybe had alcohol problems and were in recovery, ended up, basically falling off the wagon, for want of a better word. So that's something that's happened there. And then on the obesity side, which is obviously a significant risk factor as well, the data shows like if you're obese over a 30 BMI, you're more at risk of it as well. But we've seen as well over the last year that, basically your BMI, and this is scientific peer-reviewed studies as well, with higher BMI, you're like nearly 3 times more likely for hospitalization, 2 times more likely for ICU, 2.6 times more likely for invasive mechanical ventilation, and the list goes on about this as well. And if you had a BMI greater than 40, so we're talking about extreme obesity, your chances of dying from COVID was like you had 90% more chance of dying. So I suppose I wanted to kind of ask you about, before we talk about the impact of that to mental health, I actually wanted to ask you about like the term many people may be familiar with who've studied psychology, ELOCs and ILOCs, external locus of control and internal locus of control. And I'm happy to have your thoughts on this. Why is it that with these things that are within the person's internal locus of control, alcohol and obesity, people don't want to really manage it? It's actually getting worse. But the external things like vaccines and masks and stay away from me, people are jumping up and down and acting like, the Ultimate Warrior off wrestling, going crazy, screaming and roaring at people when they can't even do what's in their own control. Do you have any kind of insights into why that's happening at the moment? That's a very broad question, but I'm interested from a psychologist's perspective, why people have gone like this.
You got me confused with the wrong type of psychologist again, mate. My background is organizational psychology.
Wait, now, hold on. This is Psychology 101. Yeah, if you don't know what ELOCs and ILOCs are, you're getting kicked off the podcast. It's general psychology. That's like me saying I don't actually know, what 2 stages of sleep are.
With not looking at any evidence. You've got the data. I haven't looked at the evidence myself, and you're asking me to make some assumptions.
Yeah, but this is what a good scientist. This is what a good asshole scientist does. He gets data and then he corners somebody.
And I'm not falling into it. So you've kind of set me up there, I think, with that.
No, I tell you what, I haven't set you up, but what I am actually interested is why is it? The broader question is, when something is in somebody's control, why do they not basically look at that and acknowledge it and manage it, as opposed to being focused on something in external locus of control? I'm using this as a segue into some other questions I want to ask you about COVID, but it's just something I'm really interested in about why people want to look externally as opposed to looking internally. And the same question could be asked for anything, actually, to be honest with you. It's like...
Oh, no, I'm thinking about the parallels already with mental health work, right? You look at employers and they go, well, no, it's not our responsibility that someone's gotten ill. That's their responsibility.
Yeah.
It should be an individual thing that they should be managing. It's not something that we should be controlling. And so, if I had to guess, I'd be saying, well, the external locus control stuff, well, that's outside of my control, and I just hope that will get managed. Internal locus control, I actually have to make a commitment to action. I have to change habits. I need to do the hard work, you work out 2 hours a day. You have to make a decision every day. Am I going to do this, or am I just going to stay in bed? And it's hard to develop those habits. And so, sometimes it's just easier to go, no, it's all the external stuff, rather than me having to make a hard decision today or putting myself under, making myself a bit uncomfortable.
All right. I'll leave it at that. We'll come back to that question on their podcast. But you're right, though, because it's interesting to say about the exercise. Like, people said to me, oh, it's all right for you, Ian. You like eating healthy. You don't like alcohol and you like running. I'm like, no, I like sitting on the couch, eating cheeseburgers and doing nothing. That's really what I like, but I don't like how I feel after I do it. And that's the carrot for me. I don't want to be sitting there, feeling like shit, watching Star Wars again, although I'd love to do it, but that would feel like crap. Yeah. So Jason, as a segue into that COVID-19 thing, like, I suppose over the last year or so, again, we've seen lots of different changes with people. We've seen, we've seen it here recently in Perth. Everything was fine, and all of a sudden, bang! 5 days snap lockdown, and then we had 2 weeks of wearing masks, and people were like getting a bit aggressive in certain situations. We see it happening again in Melbourne this week with a snap lockdown as well. People now are probably worried about, are we going to be constantly in and out of this for 2 or 3 years? Can I ever travel? I haven't got to see my family overseas, which is a benefit for me. I'm never going to go on holiday again. How is that affecting how people are in the workplace? And what's the ramifications of that? What can we expect to see? Because I don't think we've fully seen it. And so what is to come, do you think?
Yeah. So the thing is, I think the pandemic has really put a spotlight on mental health, right? And the effects the pandemic is having. But people forget that before the pandemic, things weren't great. In the UK, Canada, Australia, we all had our worst reporting periods for work-related stress or psychological injury claims before the pandemic. But like sleep loss or fatigue, it's a number of factors that can be cumulative that lead to you feeling fatigued or make you feel stressed or make you mentally ill. It's not just one thing. It's like the final thing that breaks the straw that breaks the camel's back, if you like. And so people were already stressed. We had record levels of stress in all of these countries. And then we had this massive macro level effect, right? This pandemic. And also then the global economy tanked as well. And people were being made redundant. There's job insecurity fears. So all of these stresses just hitting people at the same time. No wonder, the government was so worried about, suicides. And I'm not sure if you saw the data on that, the predictive data. They were suggesting that we had our worst year on record last reporting period for suicides in Australia, double the amount of people killed themselves compared to people who died on the road through traffic accidents. And they were predicting it could go up 50% higher again due to the pandemic. Now, fortunately, from the data that we've got so far, it doesn't look like that's the case. It looks, if anything, it's trending about the same as the last reporting period. It doesn't seem to be a big thing. But remember, the government put a lot of measures in really quickly with things like the JobKeeper program, Job Seeker, making sure that there was money going into the economy, making sure that they increased mental health services. So there's a lot of money that went into services really quickly and into the economy to try and counteract all these additional pressures. So look, we are expecting it's probably going to get worse before it gets any better. But just remember, it wasn't COVID that did this. It was already bad before the pandemic hit. But we're mindful.
I totally agree with you. And so there's actually some data I was put into a presentation for a client tomorrow morning, and it's based upon a study that was done by Michael Gradner, who's been on the podcast, who looks at basically, sort of mental health and sleep and mental illness, particularly in athletes, but also in business as well. He's a professor at the University of Arizona in the US. So he's based in Phoenix. And I was putting this is actually on the slide deck I was working on before we caught up today. And I think it might be worse in America because they didn't have, like what you said, the JobKeeper and the other support as well. But to give you an idea, and this is pre-pandemic data, in America in the last 20 years, suicide rate increased by 33% in 20 years. That's crazy. Like I shouldn't say crazy, but you know what I mean? Like it's just, and this is when we look at, sleep as a contributing factor as well. Poor sleep increased suicide risk factors 280% more for people thinking about suicide, 350% more for attempts, 240% more for death by suicide. And again, the possible sources, Jason, exactly what you said: financial hardship, pain and disease, social isolation, author thinking patterns, everything this is all pre-pandemic, and this is all the stuff that happened in the pandemic. So it's really interesting in a bad way that this has happened, because I think we will see in countries like this that haven't proactively managed it, and we might see some long-term negative impacts, which is a shame.
Yeah, there are definitely people in the mental health community talking about the echo pandemic. So it's not just going to be the immediate health implications of the pandemic, but the ongoing mental health implications that are probably going to, be going for years after, hopefully, who knows with the vaccine, right? And what happens with that. But mental health problems are here to stay. They were bad pre-pandemic. They're only going to be the same or worse after the pandemic. And it's time for businesses, I guess, if we bring it back to the workplace, to consider what can they do systemically thinking about work design, thinking about operational design to protect their people.
Yeah, and I think as well, Jason, I think I'd urge businesses as well and leaders to think about in the future world how you manage this in a remote setting as well. Because just because we've let people work from home doesn't mean that this is like a kind of a treat, using air quotes here. It's not a treat to work at home. For some people, working at home is the biggest pain in the ass they can ever imagine. For me and you, it might be fine, right? Maybe. For me, it's great. It's no problem whatsoever. My wife, perfect. She loves it. But we don't have kids. We don't have dogs. We don't have other family members staying with us. Other people might have family members, dogs, trying to homeschool kids. They might have a building site next door. They might be in an apartment. The Wi-Fi might be crap. We don't know, what's going on. So working from home isn't just a kind of a simple measure to manage all this stuff and externalize it. And so that may exacerbate things like sleep problems, mental illness, depression, any of these things that we've spoken about today. The other one as well is ergonomic design, physical health and fitness. Do they have time to go out? They're not interacting with people their own age. It's all of these things that kind of feed in and may actually make it worse over time as well. So I think the future of EAP, psychological health and safety at workplace, needs to kind of maybe think about the different scenarios that we have going forward, because on a parallel, in an integrated approach, when we're talking about sleep, mental health, physical fitness, and so on, we're seeing the same thing in the sleep world. Some of the early papers that have started coming out have shown that sleep has gone down in the pandemic. Mm-hmm. People said, it'll go up. No, it went down. And before it was going right down as well. We've seen, sleep go down by over 20% on average in humans over the last sort of 30 to 40 years in the Western world as well. So I'd like to say that things are only going to get better, but I don't know. We need to put some actions in place. And I think, sometimes I think, Jason, that maybe we should have been just engineers because it's easy. You can measure the inputs and you can measure the process and the outputs. But in the stuff that we do, it can be very hard to articulate the benefits. It's hard to create something in terms of assessing the risk. It's hard to put controls and designs in place because it's so personalized, but it has to be organizational as well. People come with their own beliefs. People come with their own opinions. Some things work, some things don't. Everybody's different, so it can be very, very hard. So, maybe we should have been just two civil engineers.
Too easy, mate. Too easy. I work with some engineers and they do some very complex stuff, I got to say. So, I think in many ways, again, I guess to wrap things up today, we're talking about fatigue, we're talking about mental health, and there are so many parallels. And I think, I've learned a lot definitely from my early days dabbling in fatigue risk management. That kind of only are now being introduced into psychological health and safety, right? And how we do mental health at work. So I think fatigue, sleep, science, that kind of area is actually done a lot earlier than what we have done with mental health at work, thinking about the systems approaches, right? Not just the individual approach. But yeah, I take what you say as well, and that mental health gets a lot more research. There's a lot more publicity around mental health than there is sleep. I love both, and I continue to work in both areas. But I think, where we can make a real step change for the health and safety of people is to really bring some of that systems level thinking into how we manage mental health in the workplace.
Excellent. That's great, Jason. So if people want to get a hold of you, they want to find out more about your services, what you offer at People Diagnostic, or with your background there in Flourish, how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way?
Yeah, best to hit me up on LinkedIn. You'll find that I'm pretty active on there. So DM me or, just connect. Otherwise, check out our podcast, Psych, Health and Safety. You'll find it on everywhere you find Ian's.
In the trash. So you're available on all podcast platforms. Yeah, go over there to LinkedIn, guys. Follow that page. It's really good. And I like the little clips. And they're good as well because you can watch the clips at work without audio. You got the little subtitles comes up, so it gives you a bit of an insight. You can, watch if you're sitting on the toilet, sitting on the train.
Watch it. You'll finally understand what Ian's been saying all this time on this podcast. So.
Yeah, well, I hope it's not one of those auto subtitles, because if it is, then we're both screwed. Excellent. Thanks very much, Jason. And as always, if you want to follow me, you can go over to Melius Consulting webpage, meliusconsulting.com.au. We've launched a new online shop over there that you might want to have a look at. We do individual and athletic solutions, education, sleep disorder screening, home-based sleep disorder screening, individual consultation and assessments. We're doing planning as well for athletes, individual athletes, and for teams as well. So if you've got like a competition coming up, we're doing some planning there. So some indicative prices over there. Have a look at those. Check out the website for all the podcasts. We've got over 80 now. You can scroll back through all of those and have a look. Plenty of blogs up there as well. You can contact us, sign up for the newsletter, which comes out every 2 months. On Twitter at Melius Perform, on Instagram on Melius Perform, and at Sleep for Perform, and on Facebook as well. But given the new Facebook stuff, I don't know if we can share much information because Mark Zuckerberg doesn't like Australian media, so not too sure what will happen over there. And on LinkedIn, like Jason as well, Melius Consulting. You can email me at ian.dunican@meliusconsulting.com.au if you want to shout at me or ask me any questions. And if you would like to leave us a 5-star review on any of your podcast apps, we would love that as well. Yeah, and until next time, thank you very much.
Pretty brown skin, baby, I can see the summer on you. You see all the bread, and I know it make you wonder, don't you? Ooh, I ain't surprised at all. Seen them rise and fall. Went up the mountain, it wasn't hard to climb at all. At the top, I found some relief. I finally got some peace. Carry on, but please don't mess up the mood. Yeah, I worked too hard for it. No, I need to beat it, before you mess up the mood. Yeah, ooh, I worked too hard for it, and I need it, so please don't mess up the mood. Don't mess up the mood. Don't mess up the mood. Yeah, I work too hard for it. Yeah. Don't mess up the mood. Oh, it's so crucial, I gotta keep it. It's in the ass everywhere. No, it's not a secret. And I bet they didn't think that I'd ever get it. Everything you've done, I get it. The life you dreaming, I live it. And I'm coming in high. You better get out the kitchen. Yeah, I could make a hit on whatever you pitching. Baby, let me fill up whatever you missing. Or you like it up at the top, it's a better view, isn't it? I'm not surprised at all, no it. Hey, what you need, come on, just pay the fee. I supply it all. Went up the mountain and it wasn't hard to climb at all. At the top I found some relief, you see. So please don't mess up the mood. Yeah, I worked too hard for it. No, I need to beat it before you mess up the mood. Alright, ooh, I worked too hard for it. So please don't mess up the mood. Don't mess up the mood. Don't mess up the mood.